We have some slides up here. They're not that essential, but just so you know, they're up there. This is the court of public opinion. It is a examination of the George Floyd case and what it can teach us in general. I came up with this speech for Toastmasters, and I came up with the content after my company said you can have Friday off so you can research like black racism and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll research the facts then on Friday. So, why should you care about the facts of the Floyd incident? We've been told for months now by major news networks, politicians, our friends, and even McDonald's and Ben & Jerry's that innocent black people across the United States are being targeted and executed by the police. The event that kicked off the resurgence of Black Lives Matter is the Floyd incident. So for the same reason we should know what the Tea Party was about in relation to the American Revolutionary War, we should investigate the Floyd incident in relation to the widespread claim that policing in the United States is systematically racist. I won't cover other incidents other than the Floyd incident in this presentation, but I've researched them to a lesser extent, and I might be able to answer some questions about that during the Q&A. So let's go to the next slide. We'll start from the day of the incident and move to where the cops are now. Initial impressions we had and questions that came up as a result of the incident gaining national attention. Audience participation is encouraged, so feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question or just add some details. Next slide, please. Okay. We'll start from the 911 call, which is what kicked off the whole thing. The owner of a store called Cup Foods called 911 and said Floyd gave him a fake $20 bill. He realized it was fake after Floyd left the store, and he ran outside and found Floyd sitting in his car, awfully drunk. Those are his words. He asked Floyd to return the cigarettes that he bought with the fake $20 bill, and he told him that if he gave back the cigarettes, he could leave. But Floyd refused. He said Floyd wasn't in control of himself. When the police arrived, the owner of Cup Foods directed them to Floyd's car, and they walked over to him. Body cam footage has confirmed that he was acting erratically, and he wasn't following orders to put his hands on the steering wheel and get out of the car. And I watched the body cam footage. This took about 10 minutes of the cops well, maybe 5 minutes of the cops telling him, get out of the car, put your hands on the steering wheel, and he kept taking them off. So it did look erratic to me. At this point, the cops decided to arrest him. They had to pull him out of the car because he didn't follow orders. And it took a few officers to control him enough to put the handcuffs on. And this is a big guy too, just for those who don't know. He's like 6'7". He looks kind of like a linebacker. So not only was he not helping out with the whole arrest, he was sort of just not following orders. He was moving away. What do the videos show? I took a look at the body cam footage. Again, the body cam footage came out more recently. I made this whole thing earlier, but with the body cam footage, we have more information. It shows him physically resisting getting into the police vehicle as well, and breathing very heavily and yelling. So it's not just breathing heavily as in like, I'm a little bit tired. You could hear his breath from the body cam footage. So there was something weird going on for sure. And he was yelling things like, I'm not that kind of person, or like I wouldn't do anything, those sort of things. He was basically telling the cops not to arrest him and not to put him in the car. Raw footage from bystanders shows Officer Chauvin. Chauvin is the main guy you see in the videos. If you've watched the videos, that's the main white guy, I guess, who you see in most of them. He's the one who has his knee on Floyd's neck. It shows him pressing his knee on the neck behind the squad car. While lying face down on the road, Floyd repeatedly groans that he can't breathe. And bystanders next to the car say, he's not even resisting arrest right now, bro. One bystander told him, and Thao, the Asian cop who was keeping bystanders away, is shown in front of him. "You're effing stopping his breathing right now. You think that's cool?" The bystander continues in that video. And that was one of the most famous videos that people saw. And it definitely put everything in the worst light possible, I think, because it captures the moment when Chauvin has his knee on Floyd, and bystanders are basically saying, "You're killing him," and the cops look like they don't care. Floyd could be heard at different points in the video, like I was saying "I can't breathe," calling out to his mom, and pleading with the officer. The other officers looked on or assisted in keeping him on the ground. In one of the videos, about 5 minutes in, Floyd stops moving and appears unconscious. People in the gathering crowd plead with the officers to check Floyd's pulse. Chauvin does not lift his knee until medical personnel arrive, at which point medics perform pulse checks several times. And he is pronounced dead at the hospital. Next slide, please. Current status of the cops. I'm going to mention the race of the other 3 cops only because the race of Chauvin has been the focus of this case. And I was surprised to find out that one of the cops was black and one was Asian. All 4 of the officers have been fired. As you can see, the charge center around second-degree murder. Chauvin and Tawa, that's the Asian cop, were taken into police custody and have been released on bond. Quang, who's the black cop, and Lane, the other white cop, were released from jail earlier than the other 2 after posting bond. They're all awaiting the trial's verdict still. The trial is still ongoing. Next slide, please. All right, initial impressions. I think it would be interesting to hear what some of you thought when you first heard of the news or watched the videos. I'll just give you my take first. I was confident that this would be correctly referred to as murder when I first watched the video and just heard the initial news. It seemed like the intentional killing of another human, not in self-defense. I was tempted to say second-degree murder was too lenient and it should be first-degree murder, because how could it not be if the cop is putting his knee on a guy's neck for 8 minutes and 47 seconds and then the man dies? It seems like a lot of time to think about what you're doing. Then I figured it would be too difficult to show that it was premeditated, so for a while I figured second-degree murder made sense. But we could take a couple minutes if anybody wants to give their impression of what they thought, maybe like on the first day or first couple days when it happened. Yeah.
My immediate reaction watching the film clip of him, the victim was handcuffed at the time and under control, basically, could not, limited in his ability to resist. And what struck me was that Chauvin, or whatever his name was not just putting his knee on the guy's neck, he was grinding that in to cause pain. Mm-hmm. And the intention to cause pain is what convinces me that he should have been charged with first-degree murder, and that is a cowardly thing for the district attorney not to have done so. The other thing that I took note of at the time was that 2 of the other police officers were rookies, less than 6 months on the job, and the 4th one was a fairly new officer with 2 years experience, and the main perpetrator had years and years of experience, and it'd be very difficult for rookie cops or even somebody with a couple of years experience to stand up and try to restrain the experienced cop.
Yeah, those are 2 very good points there. Like the first one about his knee on the neck when he's handcuffed and on the ground. It looks very unnecessary, because what else is he going to do?
The only reason for him to be grinding it in the way I saw it was to cause pain and to hurt and harm, which is an indicia of malice, which is first-degree murder in my mind.
And the other good point is that the other cops were very new, which would also go against the argument of, okay, well, one was black, one was Asian, but they were so new that they didn't want to speak up and contradict Chauvin, maybe. So, good points there. Anybody else?
Yeah, so I've done a couple different martial arts, and the honest reality is you learn things that are significantly more ruthless than that. Yeah, in fact, there were plenty of different like submissions and things that could possibly break your spine. So when I see things like this, I mean, I did see the ladder release video first, and where it actually shows him resisting. So my initial impression was that like he was doing whatever he could to get this guy under control. And I mean, yeah, restraining someone really sucks. You kind of have to be aggressive with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, later body cam footage does show more of the resisting that Floyd did, which adds to what you're saying, is like they weren't just doing that for fun. So, good point there.
Yeah, my reaction to it was less about having an opinion about it, largely because every single time I see something on the news, 6 months later, you find out that it's pretty much the exact opposite. And I'm not talking about just the police. I mean, literally everything I watch on the news. My main reaction to that was, since that happened, I think it was like end of April, I was just thinking, with all the free time everybody had, and how frustrated everybody was being locked down, that we were about to have a lot of fighting going on. Just because the situation we were in with the lockdown is pretty much a recipe for aggression.
You thought they were looking for like an excuse to make things more chaotic?
I think that basically in those situations, you really don't need much of an excuse. Like if you took 2 kids and locked them in their rooms because you grounded them for 2 months under pretty much the same conditions, you know that, you know, one of them drinks the last of the apple juice and they're going to be fighting. You know? Like I was just like, okay, we're going to have rioting.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting that you could foresee that. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I just have a question. I'm not sure if I understood you correctly. At what point, are you saying that he was resisting when he was handcuffed and laying down on the ground?
So I guess you could say there's 2 points where he resisted. One, getting out of his car, and then when they were putting him in the cop car.
Okay, fine. But once he was laying down and handcuffed, he was not resisting. Is that true?
When you watch the body cam footage, they successfully put him in the cop car, and then he kicks his way out the other side.
What I saw is that when he was in the back seat of the cop car, he was yelling, "I'm claustrophobic, I'm claustrophobic,"
Yeah.
which didn't make any sense. He was sitting behind his own, he was sitting in his own car for 20 minutes or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but anyway.
His face was actually larger than where he was before.
The cop was acquiesced and said, "Okay, you're claustrophobic, come on out," and then he laid him down on the ground. That's the way I remember the video. It's been a long time. But, you know, once he was laying down, I didn't, you know, and handcuffed, I don't see how he can resist.
Yeah, he kicked quite hard, and he came out the other side of the car, and so he kept sort of thrashing, I guess you could call it. And at that point, they're like, okay, well, we can't put him in the car. We've got to do something for now. And there are other details too that I'll mention after this too, but there's something about excited delirium too, which has been kind of a term that's been thrown around. I mentioned his heavy breathing and his yelling and his thrashing. That's all part of symptoms of basically going, not crazy, but like basically letting go of your faculties and not really knowing what's going on. So I can mention more of that a little bit later. All right, next slide. Are the cops involved racists? You might ask, why else would he have done that? Put his knee on someone's neck when they're handcuffed on the ground, especially given just a history of oppression in this country against black people, sometimes by cops. There's claims that Chauvin was seen wearing a "Make Whites Great Again" hat. Turned out to be fake news, according to ABC News. So if ABC News tells us that someone was not wearing a "Make Whites Great Again" hat, that's pretty reliable.
Yeah.
Did Chauvin shoot an unarmed black man in 2008? He did shoot the black man in 2008. Whether the black man was reaching for Chauvin's gun or not is a he said, she said situation. There's no body cam footage of that incident, so maybe he did. There are reports that Chauvin knew Floyd personally. Two people who used to work with Chauvin who have offered their opinion. A coworker at a club where Chauvin used to work as a security guard and the club's owner. The coworker first claimed that Chauvin and Floyd knew each other well. He retracted that story and said he got Floyd and another black worker confused. However, he didn't retract the fact that Floyd worked there. But he's not sure they worked next to each other. So they might have worked next to each other, and it might have been a personal vendetta. That's an interesting hypothesis, which we still don't know the result of. And lastly, the club owner says Chauvin was too aggressive when responding to fights when the club hosted events that drew mainly black clientele.
Can I ask how long ago he worked at this club?
That was, I'm actually not sure about that, years ago. But I do know he's a very experienced cop. He was the most experienced of the group.
So it
So it would have been a long time ago.
years ago.
Probably.
A lot of cops moonlight as security guards.
Oh, so it could have
That's a
been.
very common mistake. Yeah, because in a lot of states, only police officers are able to carry a firearm
Okay.
when being security, including Colorado police cops.
Yeah.
But-
You see a cop
If anybody
in a bar,
knows.
it's like he's actually on his off security.
So yeah, not really sure. I didn't look up that, but probably years ago.
I think I heard he had worked at a club, Chauvin worked there for 15 to 20 years since that opened. A significant long time.
Do you know if he left? When he
I
left?
think he was still working there at that point.
Okay.
And had gone through multiple owners.
Okay, so he might have still been working there.
Well, Floyd was well known as an athletic hero, and he was a man of huge size. A guy like that doesn't go around unnoticed. And Chauvin had to know exactly who it was he had.
Yeah, I would say they probably did know each other because they worked in the same company.
Apparently they're both security guards for the club.
Okay, and
Yeah.
does it say when he left?
I'm searching the CNN article.
Okay.
Trying to find out.
Maybe we'll mention that in the Q&A. So yeah, the club owner was saying he was too aggressive when responding to mainly black clientele events, doing things like pepper spraying the entire crowd instead of taking a more subtle approach.
Well, why didn't she fire?
That's standard. That's standard operating procedure.
Yeah.
Why didn't she fire him?
That's true. That's a good point. The coworker I mentioned previously also said he was too aggressive, but he didn't specify whether it was toward black people or just in general. The club owner's statement that he was more aggressive with black people was the only kind of reliable evidence that I could find that Chauvin might be racist. I couldn't find much info on the history of the other three cops, although I think it's improbable that the black one was racist against black people. I think this leaves us with more questions than answers. Did Chauvin and Floyd know each other? Was this a personal vendetta? Does Chauvin react differently to black people? It may turn out as evidence comes out in the initial trial and as reporters do more digging that racism was a factor. But as far as the research I've done, I couldn't find enough evidence to say one way or the other. Of course, not all racists go around declaring the fact that they're racist, so we might never know. Next slide, please. Or were the cops trying to kill Floyd? There's the question of the net restraints. I think most people, including me, initially assumed that a cop putting his knee on Floyd's neck was clear evidence that he was trying to kill him. I had never seen that technique used before. The first picture shows a Canadian officer using a neck restraint. The second picture shows Israeli soldiers using the same technique. Surprisingly, many US police departments, including the Minneapolis Police Department, which is where Chauvin and the others are from, are trained by Israeli Defense Forces. The Minneapolis Police Manual said, the unconscious neck restraint shall only be applied on a subject who is exhibiting active aggression, or for life-saving purposes, or on a subject who is exhibiting active resistance in order to gain control of that subject, and if lesser attempts at control have been or would likely be ineffective. This passage has now been updated to disallow this technique. The fact that a neon neck restraint is allowed by the Minneapolis Police Department doesn't automatically mean that the cop in question is innocent. He may have used the restraint when it wasn't necessary. He may have used the restraint incorrectly, and we still have the possibility that he actually wanted to kill Floyd, and he used the tools that were available to him to achieve that, knowing that he would probably not get in too much trouble in the end because it's allowed in the manual. But the technique is supposed to render a person unconscious. So in the video where it looks like Floyd is dead, he might have just been unconscious. The question of, is this method of subduing someone too dangerous, and should it be phased out of police training? That requires its own presentation, but here's a statistic I found on how dangerous it is. NBC News reported that it was used by the police department at least 237 times since the start of 2015. 44 of those resulted in loss of consciousness. The restraint was normally used in cases where the suspect fled on foot or resisted being taken into custody. I couldn't find information on how many of those died, although I assume the article would have mentioned if some of them had died. As far as the criminal record of Floyd, it's relevant to mention here that Floyd had a long rap sheet, and I'm not saying that as a way of saying he deserved to be killed. But when a cop detains someone, they will typically check the database for past crimes and to see whether someone is a wanted criminal. And if Floyd had violent crimes on his record, that might have factored into how the cops treated him. We also see in the body cam footage one of the passengers in Floyd's vehicle telling the cops that Floyd had a long history of getting into trouble. If I had heard that as a cop, it would put me more on edge. So just to describe basically the worst crime that he had on his record, he served 5 years in prison for aggravated robbery, where 2 adults and a toddler heard a knock at the front door. One of the adults looked out the window and she saw a man dressed in a blue uniform who said he was with the water department. When one of the adults opened the door, the man in blue and 5 other men that exited a nearby vehicle entered through the front door. The largest of these suspects forced his way into the residence, placed a pistol against the complainant's abdomen, and forced her into the living room. The large suspect then proceeded to search the residence while another armed suspect guarded the complainant, who was struck in the head and side areas with a pistol after she screamed for help. As the suspects looked through the residence, they demanded to know where the drugs and money were, and another adult advised them that there were no such things in the residence. The suspects then took some jewelry along with the complainant's cell phone before they fled the scene in a black Ford Explorer. Then about 3 months later, the Houston Police Department found them. They came across a vehicle and identified one of the suspects. The statement reads, at 6'7", Floyd was identified as the largest of the 6 suspects who arrived at the home before looking for items to steal. So that's a description of just some of the criminal record that the police might have seen on the record if they checked while arresting Floyd. And now let's go to the autopsy. That's on the same slide. The medical examiner, found that Floyd died of cardiac arrest, not asphyxiation. And he had traces of fentanyl and methamphetamine in his system. I've heard people describe this, I haven't confirmed this, that he had enough fentanyl in his system to kill a horse. Maybe true or not, I haven't checked that, but he did have traces of both of those drugs in his system. And the cardiac arrest would be compatible with having a lot of drugs in your system of that type. Floyd can be seen in one of the videos letting go of a small white packet which falls to the ground after he's handcuffed. The medical examiner also found that Floyd had hypertensive heart disease already. Of course, the cardiac arrest was likely brought on by the exertion of the stress of the arrest, but according to the medical examiner, he didn't die from not being able to breathe. And more evidence to this is that he says he can't breathe before he's put on the ground. So before anyone even has their arms on his neck or anything like that, he says he can't breathe, which is also evidence for the fact that he was having an episode of stress or excited delirium, which some people call it. It's worth noting that Floyd's family hired 2 independent doctors, and they believe he died of asphyxiation. However, they based their conclusions on reviewing the circumstances and watching the video and the information the medical examiner released. They didn't have access to the body or the toxicology report, so basically they judged things on publicly available information. All right, next slide, please. Statistics on homicide of Black people in America. Why am I bringing up the statistics of homicide of Black people in America? Because the Floyd incident has been presented by many people as evidence of a larger issue, and that's why the protests and riots have occurred. It wasn't just that incident. Even if it turns out that the Floyd incident was a racist killing, we would need more evidence to make the case that it's happening across the United States at numbers large enough to warrant alarm. So let's get some statistics out. The police fatally shot 9 unarmed Black people and 19 unarmed white people in 2019, according to the Washington Post database. In 2015,
Do you mind repeating that one more time?
9 unarmed Black people and 19 unarmed white people in 2019. That's according to the Washington Post database. And by the way, if anyone wants sources on all this stuff, I have sources at the bottom of each slide, and I can email that to you.
And was that in Minneapolis, those stats, or?
That's nationwide. In 2018, there were 7,407 Black homicide victims overall. If we assume a comparable number of victims in 2019, those 9 unarmed Black victims of police shootings represent 0.001% of all Black people killed in 2019. And I'm not trying to minimize the deaths of those 9 unarmed Black men. I'm only putting them in a wider context, because the wider context is the focus of the protests and riots. The National Academy of Sciences found no significant evidence of anti-Black disparity in the likelihood of being shot by the police. Research by Harvard economist Ronald G. Fryer also found no evidence of racial discrimination in shootings, and you'll notice that I quoted institutions that are more left-wing, just to make sure that it's not a factor.
I mean, Harvard's left wing.
Harvard's pretty left-wing, I think. National Academy of Sciences is also pretty left-wing. What is Breitbart think? I don't know. Probably the same thing. Statistics on overall homicide of Black people. According to 2018 FBI data, more than 88% of Black murder victims were killed by other Black people. And you might say, okay, but Floyd wasn't shot. True. Still, the belief that Black people are being hunted by the cops is not supported by these statistics. Next slide, please. Why are there protests and riots? In this whole presentation, I haven't been trying to erase the difference between peaceful protests and riots, but I'm looking at both in this slide because they both fit into the category of those who are angry about the incident and other incidents. There are at least 2 assumptions driving the discontent. One, that too many law enforcement officers are racist. 2, that there is a widespread problem with police killing innocent Black people. If we look at the Floyd incident, no strong evidence that Chauvin is racist has been reported. It might come out later on, but so far there isn't enough evidence to claim that he is. there's also the probability of the black officer being racist. I've analyzed the claim that there is a widespread problem with cops shooting unarmed black people and haven't found that to be true. Of course, I'm open to being shown that I'm wrong about any of this in this presentation. We should consider whether conceding without enough evidence that this was a race-based crime and that black people are being hunted by the cops is fanning the flames of conflict. Whether signs on stores that read Black Lives Matter, we stand with you, or messages that company management send out condemning racism and adding, if all of those things are adding fuel to the violence. The argument I'm making here is not that we shouldn't care about Floyd or that Chauvin did nothing wrong. I'm simply pointing out that it's not a cut and dry case of a racist white cop hunting a black man. And even if it was, the statistics don't show that it's a widespread phenomenon. So to end this, if we want to end racism, and I assume all of us oppose it, we need to be able to reserve judgment in situations of conflict between people of different races. The assumption that in a situation of conflict between people of different races, someone in the situation must be racist might come from the fear that if we ask questions or remain neutral until more evidence comes in, that could be seen as remaining passive in the face of injustice, or worse, silently supporting racism, as some protesters believe. You might have seen some signs that read, "Silence is complicity," or "Silence is violence." The rhyming makes it better. You know.
Everything that rhymes.
Everything that rhymes is true. So, but that approach is unwise because jumping to conclusions can itself be a case of injustice, as we've seen with the riots that have killed innocent black people and destroyed black businesses. Pictured in the middle right is David Dorn, a black officer who was killed by rioters while trying to defend his friend's pawn shop. On the right of that is a black businesswoman whose business was destroyed by looters and rioters. The point is, if Black Lives Matter, we need to think of them too. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you. Go ahead.
I have a question. Do you know that the drugs that were found in Floyd have a side effect of heart problems or breathing problems?
Well, methamphetamine, I'm pretty sure it does. I haven't checked specifically, but I think meth would have an effect on the heart. You want to add something to that?
Yeah, I know this because my best friend actually nearly died from this. He broke his leg really bad, and they used fentanyl plus another painkiller, and this was like right after they broke it, or right after he broke it. Fentanyl plus any other opiate magnifies the response, so you go from, like feeling some effects to being dead really quickly. His O2 saturation rate was 50% for like 3 minutes, and he actually almost died.
Not sure what that is, but it sounds
so
bad.
you could literally like suffocate to death in an oxygen tank.
So he had like half the oxygen that he normally would have.
Yeah, for reference, Michael Jackson's was at 70% when he died. And then the Russians in Chechnya, when like some opera house was taken over, they literally pumped fentanyl through the vents, and they literally had to like run in with a bunch of needles, stabbing people with the, I'm not sure exactly what they stabbed them with, but basically, if they, with like Narcan or something, if they hadn't, they would have literally died. So, fentanyl is not something you want to mess with if you don't have to.
I have two partners that are related. First is you said it was a medical examiner. Can you just confirm it was a medical examiner, not a coroner?
The reports I read said medical examiner.
Okay, as long as that, I just want to make sure. There's a very distinct difference between an ME and a coroner. A coroner is not a doctor. And it's an appointed position, which is the anyway.
It was like the city medical examiner.
So, my actual question is, what, if someone was a bystander in this
good question, because the cops, in this situation, the cops had called the ambulance basically right when they got him on the ground. And they arrived, that's how long it took them to arrive, about 8 minutes. So I guess, yeah, that's a good idea. If you see, if it looks like the cops are about to kill someone, maybe calling an ambulance might distract them. I'm not sure, like, if bystanders were basically yelling at them to stop, that was, I mean, short of rushing them, that was the only thing you could do.
So that's just a shot, frankly.
Even if paramedics are there, let's say they can just summon them at the time that something's going wrong, would they interrupt police doing their police duties?
Probably not.
You know what I mean? So like even if they were there, I said, no, we're training him. Like,
Oh, that's true, yeah.
that's what they would have actually physically intervened, so no, he's gonna die, we need to fix him.
But
Yeah.
you might be able to say with common sense, let me check for a pulse, and that's the difference that the police officer might let close enough.
Yeah, and yeah, the officers might not give control over to the paramedics only because that technique is supposed to, like, the intention of it is to render someone unconscious or just like immobile, like really docile. So they only let go once he was like basically limp. So that's about all you can do, I guess. Other questions?
I got two. First off, one, do you think he's going to be acquitted? And then two, do you think that this case is a good example of police acting wrongly? Or should they have used one of the other cases instead?
So the first one, I do think they will probably be acquitted because second-degree murder is very serious and it requires intentional killing. And in this case, they were following police procedure to put a knee on the neck if the subject is resisting. So I think they will probably get off on that. Second, is it an example of police misbehaving? Maybe. Based on the fact that he was acting so erratically, and the fact that the medical examiner said he died of cardiac arrest, he had heart problems, he had a lot of drugs in the system, and he was in a very excited state. My guess is that his heart gave out because of all that stress. What else would they have done? I'm not sure. They could have handled the situation a lot better just because he was thrashing so much.
Do you think there are more cases, or other cases that are more egregious that should be the focus of the protesters? So like Duncan Lemp or Tamir Rice or some of those other cases? Breonna Taylor?
Maybe Breonna Taylor, it represents more of a lack of accuracy on the side of cops shooting. They were shooting, they started shooting after they were getting shot at. So lack of accuracy, I guess, maybe they didn't care as much about where they were shooting. Ahmaud Arbery, maybe, because the video shows him jogging toward the car when it stopped and then running at the person with the, I think it was a shotgun, trying to take it away from him.
But
That
those
case-
weren't cops, were they?
No, they were just,
Yeah, they was.
I think it was an ex-cop. I think one of them was an ex-cop.
He was an
but-
ex-cop.
That was an ex-cop.
I think you could maybe make the argument of they shouldn't have been pursuing him in a car and trying to catch him, and maybe he felt threatened, so he tried to take the gun away from them. Although I think he could have run away into the.
Just ask in a private society though, like, do we just let criminals run away?
Right.
Like when you say they shouldn't be chasing them, like, I don't know. Do you think it's inaccurate to describe someone who is actively attempting to grab a shotgun out of somebody's hands as unarmed?
Right. Yeah, I don't think he was unarmed. I think I'm just trying to make like the best devil's advocate argument of like, did he rush him because he was scared he was going to get shot, so his only option was to grab the gun? I think he had more options. Probably he could have probably run away to the side because the car was already stopped.
Well, how about with Jacob Blake? I could understand the cop shooting him when he reached into the vehicle, and the cop tried to grab him and was not successful, so he shot him.
Yeah.
I could understand shooting him once, but 7 times is a little bit confusing for me.
No, you would never shoot someone just once.
Okay, twice.
No, you would stop shooting once they stop moving.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how the cops are trained. I know that, of course, you know, as a civilian, you know, if I was in that situation, yeah, I would shoot somebody until they stop moving. I'm with you. But a cop, I think, would be better trained than that.
No, that's good training.
Okay.
That's good training. So.
Yeah, I know.
And the triggers are fast enough that you know, between 3 and 5 shots is almost unnoticeable.
The difference between 3 and 5 shots is unnoticeable depending on the firearm. Automatic, sure. Semi-automatic, no, you have to pull 2 more times.
But cops are trained the same way. They're trained to stop firing when the threat is done.
Yeah, I've seen some videos where someone gets shot once or twice, they fall to the ground, they look like they're done, and then they get back up and rush the cop.
Yeah. And there's plenty of people who get shot once or twice and don't even feel it because they're so.
Especially like
Right,
if the cops don't know if they're on drugs or not.
Exactly.
They don't do a drug test when they do.
Well, and you don't even have to be on drugs. If your adrenaline is pumping like it
Yeah,
would be in
that
a
is a drug
situation
crime.
like that, then you can.
2 more
And you
questions?
survive this
2 more questions.
Exactly.
2 more questions.
Do you think there was ever a chance to have the focus on this being the war on drugs or the power that police have, or was that just there's no once you have herd mentality, there's no chance of this happening? The focus on the real cause of why why these situations happen.
Yeah, it'd be nice if we could focus on the real cause instead of are the cops racist or not. Because in this situation, I don't know. I guess what would you say about Floyd?
He was forced to use illegal drugs because you can't get drugs anywhere else.
Yeah, maybe the drugs he would have gotten would be better in a free society, and he wouldn't have been still a rat, possibly.
And the cops have the power under Joe Biden's rules to do whatever the hell they want. So it's like the focus is on policies from years ago. It should have been on politicians to set up these shitty policies, and we're kind of stuck with it. This is the
Yeah,
result.
and I guess you could say there would also be less crime in a free society because there would be so much easier to get a job and make a good living. So yeah.
This is what always happens, though. It's
Yes.
a classic divide and conquer tactics.
You cited 2 sources that argued that systemic racism maybe doesn't exist or it's very small or...
In the cops, specifically. Yeah.
Okay. So I was going to ask related to that. I guess systemic racism is a general term. Do you think it's plausible that there is systemic racism, not maybe in policing per se, but judicially or legislatively or in other parts of the whole government apparatus that police would need to enforce, and then maybe it's not the policing itself and not targeting black people, but by the nature of the judicial system and the precedents or the laws that they end up targeting blacks more than they ought to?
Yeah, I think that's one of the pushbacks of like, do they arrest black people more because they're black, and then do they give them worse sentences because they're black, things like that. I think my main rebuttal to the first one of do they go after black people more when they commit a crime is if you compare the number of calls to police and the number of arrests, there isn't a big disparity. So it's not like they're just ignoring calls for white people and then going after the calls for black people. Like the numbers match up pretty well. And as far as like, do they get worse sentences because they're black? A lot of times they have longer rap sheets, so they might get a worse sentence because of that.
When you get a
Why would
case
that
like
be,
this,
though?
when you get a case like this, like what happened in Oakland with the car shooting, after a police officer who could never win a case like this, even when he's doing everything according to department policy, because they say, well, he should have been trained better, he shouldn't have shot so many times, but they don't realize that the officer has to go to training, he has to go to Post Academy. All these people are telling him, this is what you're going to do. You're going to shoot, you're going to do double tap, you're going to shoot center mass, you're going to shoot until the threat is neutralized. And people don't, the general public don't see that, they don't realize it. Like maybe they take a ride along or something, they say, okay, this is how it really is. The cop is never going to be correct because no matter what he does, it's always going to be scrutinized. Just like this the George Floyd incident, the officer has this, and it looks terrible. It looks terrible when people, bystanders, are all saying, what's going on here? But that is accepted police procedure. Now, will it change? Probably. They're probably going to say, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. But unfortunately, because of trial by mob, these officers don't have a chance. They're probably going to have to take it out of Minneapolis. I would argue for that if I were their attorney. But even then, it's like so many people know this, there's no way they can get, they may not get second-degree murder, but they will get something. They will get something because they'll say, like in the Oakland case, they're going to say, well, we can't go first degree, we can't go second degree. But the,
Well, already been fired.
the subsequent crimes of manslaughter, we're gonna get you for something because we have to satisfy this bloodlust on the part of the public.
Yeah, that's one of the downsides too.
What role do you think unions play in all of this?
Like, will they be on their side?
I mean, when they talk about Chauvin having previous issues and things, you can't fire someone even if they were a bad cop because the union will not let you. What?
Well, from what I read, they were already fired. Like,
But
they
I'm
were
saying,
fired
like,
immediately.
in general, like, before this event happened, if there were previous issues,
Yes.
the union protects its own, whether or not they're
You
good or
mean like
bad
in
cops.
cases
the
where they
union
don't
is-
really know if it was,
Sure, like, the
they didn't
union
get
is
much
gonna,
attention.
I mean, that's true of teachers, like, bad teachers or just mediocre
Yeah, I
teachers.
see what you're saying,
Not
like-
good teachers are protected by the union so much, and then the second something happens, like, they're out, and it's
Yeah.
totally the police force's fault.
yeah, that's a good point. Just like police get away with a lot during their career because of the police unions doing such a good job of defending them. Sometimes
Sometimes too much, too
wrongly,
far.
like when they shoot dogs and stuff like that.
I don't know, just in general, I think the union makes it so that they're almost too protected.
Yeah, and
But-
that also brings up the point of like the police are a monopoly. So if they had competition, then the best procedures would win out, and there would be a lot less of this.
But I think we see the same thing with teachers, where it's not quite a monopoly, but it's close.
Yeah.
And you can't, like, the difficulty in firing bad cops, bad teachers, whatever, but then the second something goes wrong, it's completely on them, like when it goes really wrong, right? It's completely on them, or it's the police force, it's systemic, it's this and that, but the unions take no heat ever.
Yeah,
How does that work?
your level of nuance right now is like 5 levels higher than the national conversation is.
I know.
If you could do it universally good, so if you're on the left,
Clearly.
And hate police unions because the union, dog police because they're part of the union.
All right. Well,
That's good analysis.
so we've had a lot of questions. Thanks for listening to the presentation, and hopefully you learned one or two things.
Give it up for Jeff.
Everybody, thanks for coming out. We'll be back in 1 month, the 3rd Wednesday of November. That's probably going to be the last event we're going to do for the year. Hopefully back to regular events next year. We'll be posting on Facebook, Meetup. We're also on Telegram if you're interested. So everybody, thanks for coming out. Keep fighting the state, and have a good night.